Hello, guys. Hello, Vivek. Hello, Tarun. Can you hear me?
Hola,
Yes.
again.
So it's a really pleasure to have you here with us tonight. We are also excited to hear all the things that you guys have to tell us. We are very, very excited. So I'm going to leave you two in this talk. And in the end of the conversation, I will come back with some questions from our audience. So we have lots of people watching us right now, and they're going to come back. I'm going to come back in the end with a lot of questions to interact with you. But now the show is with you, and I would like to invite you to have fun with us here and share a lot of information regarding this future of the world and how can we use the purpose to solve a lot of problems we have with technology and all of that, that we are really, really happy to hear from you. So have fun. The stage and the show is with you.
Hello, I hope you all are having a fantastic time at this conference. My name is Tarun Wadhwa, and I'm an entrepreneur and strategist based in San Francisco. It's my pleasure to be with you here today. What an interesting year it has been. We are in the midst of so much disruption and change. Society, business, government, everything around us seems to be changing. But the thing is, this is just the start. We're living in this exponential future, and things are only going to get faster from here. So there's no one better I can think of to put this all into context than my guest here today. I am honored and thrilled to introduce my father, Vivek Wadhwa, or as I call him, Dad. Vivek is a distinguished fellow at Harvard Law School's Labor and Work-Life program, and he's one of the sharpest thinkers of the future we have today. He's the author of 5 best-selling books, including his most recent, From Incremental to Exponential. He's been a teacher at Carnegie Mellon, Duke, Emory, Stanford, and Berkeley before Harvard. He writes for Fortune and Foreign Policy, and before that, he's written thousands of publications in the top business, tech, and policy publications all around the world. He advises governments and companies, but he's most well known for being an outspoken voice on diversity, innovation, promoting the work of entrepreneurs, and how to pull off large-scale reinvention. And before all that, he was a serial entrepreneur. So Vivek and I have spent the last few years working together, going around the world, helping corporations understand the advances in technology and how they can reinvent themselves with that. So with all of that said, I'm thrilled to be here with you today with my dad to discuss how entrepreneurs can solve our biggest challenges. So the first question I have for you, Vivek, Dad, is in the decade, which grand challenges do you think we will be able to successfully address?
Well, first of all, is my video working? Because that's one of the grand challenges.
It is not, and so we are already behind on our grand challenges.
Oh boy. Okay, let me try getting this fixed first, and then we'll get on to saving the world.
We can hear you.
Okay, so okay, you
Here
can
we
see
go.
me.
You're back. The future is back.
Yeah. First of all, I think that in the next decade or so, we will be able to solve almost every major problem humanity has if we do things right. Now, we're going to end up creating many, many more problems, but let's start with some of the big ones we know today. Number one, energy. In the next 5 to 10 years, the cost of solar and wind will be about a quarter of what it is, 25% or less of what it is today. Within the, by 2030, 2035, it will seem like it's free. Literally, it'll be like the water you get from your taps. It's almost free. That's how electricity and energy will be. Why? Because of exponential technologies. As the number of installations doubles, the price drops. As the price drops, the installations doubles. So we're on a virtual cycle right now, a virtuous cycle. So every year you're seeing about 20% drops in the price of solar. So now look forward and you begin to see that we can solve a lot of problems of humanity by having free energy. Because in Brazil, you have, in the cities you're well off, you have electricity. In some of the poorest parts of Brazil, they don't have electricity. In Latin America, you go to some of the poorer countries in Latin America, they don't have electricity everywhere, which means that children can't study when they come home. And you also can't do things like boil water so you can get clean water. So people get sick from infectious diseases because of that. If the price of energy drops to almost zero, then we can fix that problem. Another thing is food. I mean, there's still starvation across the world. Even in America, there's a lot of poor people who don't get enough food, right? Well, what if we can have vertical farms and grow all the food we want? The cost of vertical farming today is still higher than regular farming because of the cost of energy. When the cost of energy drops to zero, then you can grow in all of these office buildings that are being abandoned right now because no one wants to go to work anymore, you can now start having vertical farms and grow all the healthy organic food that you want. So we can solve the problem of food. And then let's talk about disease and health. With the data that we're gathering from our sensors, I mean, this device over here, my smartphone, has dozens of sensors in it, very advanced sensors. It keeps track of your activity levels. It keeps track of your movements. It keeps track of a lot of different things. There are all sorts of sensors which keep track of us now. Also, genetic sequencing, the cost of genetic sequencing has dropped exponentially. That soon that'll almost be free as well. So when we get all of this data, we'll be able to now find the correlations between our genome, our lifestyle, our habits, and our health. And we'll be able to now come up with cures for the most deadly diseases in the world because of the advances that are happening in that. Education, just like we're now sitting here in California, Silicon Valley, talking to people in Brazil. Soon we will have virtual reality devices, VR, in which we'll put on headsets, and maybe we do this meeting on the moon or in Tahiti, or let's go to Rio de Janeiro, when it's party time, and all congregate over there. Soon we will be able to have AI-based tutors, digital assistants that teach us electronically. So we're able to solve the problem of education. We can go on and on and on, but a lot of the key problems of humanity will be solved. Hunger, disease, poverty can be solved using technology. This is all possible right now.
That sounds wonderful, but who's going to solve it? Is it going to be the big corporations and the governments?
I was Googling an article I wrote in 2010, and I'm very embarrassed. Okay, what the article said was, this is what the article is. I talked about how the next Mark Zuckerberg may come from Brazil. I wrote this article for TechCrunch. I had been to Campinas, where they had an incubator, and I was so impressed with the entrepreneurs I saw in Campinas, Brazil, that I came back and wrote an article about it. And I said, by the end of the decade, the next Mark Zuckerberg may come from Brazil. Well, there's no Mark Zuckerberg from Brazil, and frankly, you don't want to be a Mark Zuckerberg. Mark Zuckerberg is like, if you saw Star Wars, how the Darth Vader, he became evil. He wasn't always evil. He became evil. But Mark Zuckerberg has become Darth Vader. So thank God there are no Mark Zuckerbergs coming out of Brazil. But on the other hand, you don't have any world-renowned entrepreneurs who've built world-changing startups yet. So I'm disappointed with Brazil. The challenge I want to give you entrepreneurs is in the next 5 years, I want to see a few billion-dollar companies coming out of there, and for you to disrupt not only Facebook, but Silicon Valley's top companies. Because the answer to Tarun's question is that the next, Elon Musk's, I like Elon Musk, can come from Brazil. There's no reason why you can't be solving the grand challenge of humanity and saving the world. This is all possible now.
Let's talk about two of those great challenges for a moment. The coronavirus is on all of our minds. How have you seen that change the way we approach the delivery of healthcare? What innovations are you seeing in healthcare?
Well, now when I want to see my doctor, I go on my computer. Just like I'm talking to you, I talk to my doctor now. Before, I'd have to go and wait in the office, fill out forms, and half an hour or 2 hours later, sometime, then the doctor would see me for 5 or 7 minutes. Now the doctor comes to my house. All right, so this has already changed because of the pandemic. Also, if you look at how fast we're coming up with a cure for, not a cure, for vaccines for the coronavirus, within 6 months of the disease being out, we're now testing vaccines. This is because we were able to use all sorts of data and information and the genetic sequence of the viruses to come up with the cure for it. So in the last 6 months, the field of medicine has advanced by at least 5 years. We moved forward 5 years. In the next 6 months, we're going to move forward another 5 years. This is how much technology has caused healthcare to advance because of this one pandemic.
And I'm curious, can you speak to your specific experience with HealthCube? What have you learned from trying to use HealthCube to combat the coronavirus?
Yeah, this is a device made in New Delhi. I talked about my camera went off again, it seems. Let me just talk to you and we're not worried about the camera. So HealthCube, I talked about the billion-dollar companies coming out of Brazil. There are, 20 or 30 billion-dollar companies coming out of India right now. So India is innovating the way I expected Brazil to innovate. One of the companies which I'm involved with, there is a company called HealthCubed, HealthCubed. You can go on their website and check it out. It's a small device the size of an Apple TV that does the same test as hospitals do. What do the entrepreneurs do? That they figured out that sensors are advancing exponentially. They can take the same sensors as are found in expensive medical equipment and use those on their own platform. So they built a device that costs about $1,000 that I have at home, and I can do the same tests that hospitals do. This is what has become possible.
I remember this. About 10 years ago, you wrote this piece for Foreign Policy, The End of Chinese Manufacturing and the Rebirth of US Manufacturing. Now this is a very hot political topic. We want to rethink our supply chains and move things back here. How do you think the coronavirus has changed manufacturing? Is that timeline you predicted still valid?
Well, here's the opportunity for Brazil. That coronavirus came from China. Okay, whether you like sugarcoat it or not, the fact is that China caused the coronavirus pandemic to happen. Whether they deliberately engineered this virus or not, I don't know. But the fact is that they were so the way they managed it, it spread all over the world. And in America, there is widespread fear of China. There's hatred of China. There's disgust with China. So China has become the enemy now in America. So every company wants to move manufacturing out of China. Well, where can it go? Why not Brazil? Brazil has fabulous ports. It has highly educated people. It has great infrastructure, and Americans still love Brazilians. Especially with Donald Trump and Bolsonaro being friends. I mean, birds of a feather. They get along very well. So the image of Brazil in America is positive. Why doesn't Brazil become a manufacturing center and now become America's China? That is entirely possible, especially if you start using advanced robots to do a lot of the work. In Brazil, you have all sorts of labor problems. You have all sorts of regulations which are holding the country back. But there are no regulations about robots. So you can build robotic manufacturing in Brazil and invite American companies to move their operations to Brazil. That's what's possible.
One thing I've heard you say many times is that innovation is now globalized. What do you mean by that? And then what does that mean for Brazil?
It means that the same technologies that are being built in India or built in China, that are being built in Silicon Valley, can be built in Brazil. The only thing that has to change is the Brazilian attitude. The Brazilians still don't have the confidence. When I visited there, what I noticed was that the Brazilians had an inferiority complex. This is common across Latin America. They think that the gringos in America are somehow superior to them. Forget it. The entrepreneurs here are only as smart as the entrepreneurs in Brazil are. You in Brazil can be changing the world. You have to have the confidence to do that. You have to realize that the same technology, the same smartphones I have here, you can buy in Brazil. These are more powerful than great supercomputers. These are more powerful than the supercomputers of the 1970s, which were not allowed to be exported to Brazil. All right. So you have this, the sensors are available to you, artificial intelligence tools are available to you. All of the technologies that are available to us here in Silicon Valley are available to you in Brazil. So what's holding you back? You are. You're the only problem here. The entrepreneurs are watching this, that you lack the confidence to take on the world. So entrepreneurs in China are doing this now. Entrepreneurs in India are doing this right now. Why aren't the entrepreneurs in Brazil doing this? This is a question you have to ask.
How does a country go about changing its culture around failure and risk in entrepreneurship?
Well, it has to be a FU attitude. I don't want to use four-letter words over here, but your attitude has to be that I'm going to take the risk. If I fail, I fail. If I fail, I'll start again. That's the attitude that entrepreneurs here take. Basically, don't give a damn. If you fail, you basically, as Thomas Edison said, I haven't failed. I've found 1,000 solutions that don't work. So your idea is that I'm going to try until I become very successful. Accept the fact that before you achieve success, there's a lot of failure there. So accept the fact that you're going to fail and keep trying, keep iterating. In Silicon Valley, these entrepreneurs fail all the time. I mean, except they don't call it failure. They call it pivoting. Pivoting. Look that word up and start using it, saying, I didn't fail. I just pivoted to another idea. So that's what you have to do in Brazil, is saying, I'm pivoting. Even though your company went bankrupt and you lost everything and all the investors lost, all the investment, it doesn't matter. I'm pivoting onto a better idea. I learned a lot from my last startup, so I'm now doing another startup. That's your attitude has to be. Screw everyone else. you basically learn from your mistakes and change the world.
And what do you think are the most valuable lessons that Silicon Valley has for the rest of the world?
That failure is cool. That you have to fail several times before you succeed. That again, they call it pivoting, all right? And then also another thing is learn to copy and steal. This is common in Silicon Valley. Apple, I mean, virtually every major invention of Apple's was stolen from some other company. Facebook, all they do is steal, 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 steal. Okay, that's what these companies do, is they steal from each other. Well, if you want to be like Silicon Valley, learn how to steal technology, learn how to copy. Look at the best ideas of Silicon Valley. Look at the best ideas in China. Look at the best ideas in India. Look at the best ideas in Chile. Look at the best ideas in Uruguay, and copy them. What's wrong with that? Nothing. It's the way the technology industry works. Except don't call it copying. Call it knowledge sharing. I'm learning and I'm iterating and I'm building new business models. If you call it stealing, then you go to jail. If you call it knowledge sharing, you look like a hero. You look like a Silicon Valley entrepreneur.
So remember that, everyone, you're knowledge sharing. You're not stealing, you're not copying. Important.
Yeah. But like I said, before you build anything, look globally to see who's done it before and learn what worked and what didn't work and improve on it. And what you do is look in China to start with, because China, in terms of opportunities, like Brazil. In America, we're spoiled here. In Silicon Valley, we have these spoiled brats who are rich, basically rich, spoiled brats. They have too much money and they are cut off from reality. So they don't know the problems of the world. In Brazil, you know the problems of the world, just like the Chinese and just like the Indians do. So look at the most successful companies there and copy them. Do some knowledge sharing from India and China.
So when we look at a technology like self-driving cars, I mean, it sounds awesome. It sounds like, better commutes, all these sorts of things. How do we make sure this is not just a toy for the rich? How do we make sure that the gains of technology are shared throughout society?
Well, the good thing about exponential technologies is that they become faster, they become smaller, and they become cheaper. One of the most expensive components of self-driving cars was LiDAR, LiDAR, right? There are rumors that the next iPhone is going to have a LiDAR in it, which means that the cost of the LiDAR has become practically nothing. So if those sensors, those spinning sensors, if they've now come to the point that they cost practically nothing, maybe $50, $100, what does software cost? Nothing. So self-driving cars are going to literally be priced at whatever the market will bear, which is zero. The software and the hardware will be nothing. They'll just become features on regular cars, so they will democratize. That's the beauty of exponential technologies.
And how do we go about evaluating a technology? Take something like CRISPR, which is incredibly loaded technology. How do we see if it's good or bad, or whether we should devote resources to this or not?
Every technology is good and every technology is evil. The first technology is fire. Fire could be used to keep us warm, could be used to burn down houses and to kill other people, right? So fire is good and evil. CRISPR is good and evil. CRISPR is something you can do in Brazil. You can start editing genomes. You can start editing plants. You can start editing life. What does it cost? Practically nothing, a few $100, $1,000, $2,000 to get all the stuff you want for CRISPR. If you go to my website, wadhwa.com, read my last article in Foreign Policy magazine. Wadhwa.com, my Foreign Policy magazine article on CRISPR, I talked about the good and bad of that. The good is that you can now create vaccines with it. The bad is that you can engineer viruses with it. But in it, I also had links to companies from which you can buy all the components necessary to do gene editing. So my advice to you is use it for good. Because if you leave it to China, they'll use it for evil. China uses everything for evil. And if you leave it to Silicon Valley, they'll use it to get rich. In Brazil, you have a mix here. You have a realization of the needs of the poor and the needs of society. And then you also have, a lot of wealth over there. So you have the best and the worst of both worlds. So therefore, use technology to help the poor, to help the people in need, and to uplift humanity, because this is what you can do there.
Now, many people might hear something like this and think it sounds wonderful, but that big companies are the only ones with the resources, the talent, the know-how to take on these sorts of problems. What do you think about that?
Yeah, well, this book that Tarun was showing you, this is written for big companies, all right? what it does is that it tells big companies how to defeat startups like you. On the other hand, if you're a startup, you can also read the same book and learn the secrets of other startups. So the book talks about all of the secrets of Silicon Valley, and it teaches you how to build world-changing companies. And very likely, if you're successful, then a big company will buy you, because that's what I tell big companies to do. Is that rather than trying to build their own technology, buy the successful startups. So if you end up, making $100 million instead of $1 billion, I apologize in advance, but you're going to be crying all the way to the bank, so it doesn't matter.
Absolutely. Now, one thing I've noticed is that we've worked with these workshops that we do, we've worked in about 30 different industries, many different countries, but the problems all seem to be the same, more or less. So why do big companies struggle to adapt to advancing technologies? What is it that goes wrong?
Because big companies, everyone is focused on, their boss and their boss's boss. You live in big departments, and no one cares about the company. The only person who cares about the company is the CEO. The CEO is typically an idiot who happened to get there by luck and chance, politics. So the CEO doesn't, really do anything for the company. The employees are all worried about their own survival, and therefore these large companies, majority of the large companies go bankrupt. The ones that read my book and that have employees that really try innovative techniques can reinvent themselves. I have some examples in this. For example, one of the greatest companies here in Silicon Valley is Logitech. Logitech, they produce mice and they produce the webcam I'm producing. But if you look at Logitech's numbers, they're off the charts. They're doing extremely well right now. Why? Because their CEO, Bracken Darrell, is an English major. He's not a scientist. He's an English major who decided that to focus on design. Again, I have a case study in the book about how Logitech reinvented itself, but Bracken Darrell took the risks. He realized, what it takes to reinvent companies, and he keeps reinventing his company. The result is you've got one of the most successful companies in Silicon Valley because they did the things the smart way.
Is it just about taking risks? What do these companies like Logitech get right? What is their secret?
Tarun, I want you to answer that question. You teach me, all right.
I would say they look for opportunities, they take bold risks, they devote certain resources within constraints like moonshot thinking, and then they look at converging technologies, see where they're coming together, see what new behaviors are developing, and they focus on those. Is what I observed.
Good answer. I mean, why are you asking me all these dumb questions, sir? You know all the answers.
Let's talk for a minute about employees. What does an exponential future mean for employees in their careers?
Okay, employees have to realize that if you're working for a big company, all of you are going to be pretty disappointed because your managers are typically idiots. You're smarter than they are. All right, what you have to do is use that to gain some experience and then go and start your own company. Especially Brazilian companies, Brazilian big companies, they're awful. I wouldn't wish them on my worst enemies because you're dealing with a bunch of idiots who are playing political games. So the best thing to do in Brazil is to make some money by working for the big company, learn, make some contacts, make some friends over there, learn the techniques that they use, and then go out and start your own company and put that big company out of business. It's that hopeless in Brazil. I know because I've advised a bunch of Brazilian executives, and what I find is that they don't listen. They'll come and realize they'll come and listen to me, and then they go back and they forget everything they've learned. So this is why I think Brazilian entrepreneurs, you people have to save the country. You have to reinvent the country, and you have to save the world after that.
That's a big question. Where to start? How would you start with reinventing Brazil?
Well, you have to start. I mean, Brazil has 100, 200 million people. It has 100, 200 million people problems to solve. Start finding problems to solve, and then start using advancing technologies to solve them. I have another book that you should read called Driving the Driverless Car. That book, Driving the Driverless Car, basically shows you some of the key technologies, and it walks you through how to use them in ways to solve big problems. I'm trying to get my stupid camera working again. This is awful, Tarun. I mean,
but don't worry, I'm holding up the driver in the driverless car for you. So,
all right. That's
Audience.
that's another book they need to read because it walks through the advancing technologies and it tells you what they make possible. What you have to do is start off with a problem to solve and then start thinking about what technologies can I use to solve these problems. And then again, look abroad, look in Israel also, because Israel is doing some incredible things. And, I mean, in fact, Brazil wants to be like Israel because Israel has real problems. It has hardcore entrepreneurs and it's doing wonderful things. So learn from them and solve real world problems.
A lot of people look at Silicon Valley and they see, a playground, a beanbag, ping pong tables, etc., and they think that's what makes culture. What exactly makes an innovative culture? How do you define that, and how do you create that sort of thing?
Well, you have to realize that innovation comes from everywhere within a company. It's not just the R&D departments that do innovation. It's everyone has a role in innovation, and then you have to realize that it's all about experimentation. That you have to try different things out, see what does and what doesn't work, and accept failure. So it's really innovation comes from experimentation. Do the experiments. Keep trying. Start small. Another book you should read is Eric Ries's Lean Startup. It's a wonderful book, very wonderful concepts. What he teaches is that you start small, build a minimum viable product, and then you scale up from there.
Absolutely. And then from a government perspective, from a society perspective, beyond just accepting failure, how do you encourage entrepreneurs not just to become active, but to take on these big challenges? Because the risk of failure is quite high when you're trying to solve energy or hunger or poverty or these real issues the world faces.
Yeah, I mean, there's no answer on that. You just have to, take the chance, try, keep trying, and realize that before you succeed, you're going to fail a number of times. And if your heart is in the right place, and if you bring other good people with you, go to other entrepreneurs who've tried before, who failed before, work with other smart people. With a little bit of luck and timing, you will succeed. It takes a lot of effort. You have to keep trying until you achieve success.
And you've mentioned these larger companies in Brazil that have cultures that aren't focused on innovation. Is it too late for them, or how would you go about reinventing those sorts of cultures?
Oh my God. The big companies in Brazil, I have no idea. I mean, this is why I'm saying, forget them, write them off. Entrepreneurs put these big companies out of business because they're like your government, big and corrupt, incompetent, and just that's the way it is. This is why the country is in so much trouble because these big guys aren't saving you. You have to do the work yourself. You have to now solve big problems, build a few billion-dollar companies, and then start acquiring these old companies as they go bankrupt, and then transform the country. You have to do it, by yourselves.
If you were in college right now, what would you be studying?
It really doesn't matter what you study. Look at you. Okay, I mean, you studied political science of all the things, and then you want to be a lawyer. Look at you now. I mean, I'm so proud of you. You talk about advancing technologies. You teach my classes. You get in front of CEOs of billion-dollar companies, and you're guiding them. You're basically telling companies how to reinvent themselves. So if you can do it, I'm sure that there are a lot of people who are watching this who are equally smart and competent. It doesn't matter what you study. It just the purpose of going to college is to learn where the knowledge is, and then you go out and save the world. I just talked about Bracken Darrell, the CEO of Logitech, English major. All right. So, and he has built one of Silicon Valley's most successful companies. You'll find this across the field. There are a lot of great companies. I mean, Steve Jobs, okay, college dropout. Mark Zuckerberg, college dropout. But Steve Jobs, focused on design, and it was always about the arts that he was talking. He's talking about the arts and so on. So it doesn't matter what you've studied, as long as you know that you can change the world. If you have the confidence to change the world and keep learning, surround yourself with people who are smarter than you are, hopefully you'll achieve success after a few tries.
Absolutely. Now, I want to ask you a two-part question here. If you were a younger entrepreneur in Brazil, what sorts of opportunities would you be focused on? And then I'm going to ask you in a moment if you were an older entrepreneur, because that doesn't come up nearly enough. But let's start with the younger part first. If you were 25 years old, what would you be working on if you were in Brazil?
I would start simple by looking at the app economy. I mean, I would look at the apps in China and India and see which apps I can copy and start off, my journey by building some simple apps. All right. If I was a more established, seasoned engineer, I would look at some of the sensor-based technologies. If I was a scientist, I would look at CRISPR And then I would see which problems I can solve. Now, for some of these technologies, you need more education, okay, it's because they're complex technologies. But you can learn that. Even these kids, kids in school can start learning some of the advanced technologies. Once they master them, then start applying them to solving real problems.
And if you were an older entrepreneur?
Older entrepreneurs, it's the same thing, that you team up with some younger entrepreneurs. You need young people and old people working together to solve big problems. And I would assume that the kids are smarter than I am, because very often they are smarter than the older people are.
And why is it like that? Oftentimes we think about robotics and it seems like this hard to grasp field. And then we see FIRST Robotics and it's a bunch of high schoolers building technology that would have cost millions of dollars years ago. Why is that?
Because the technologies have become so straightforward and simple that anyone can use them now. I mean, to build robots, the technologies of building robots are commonly available. To build a robot costs a few $100s right now. So the thing about the kids is that the kids don't have any inhibitions about trying bold things out. So the kids are more likely to build robots than the adults are. So they would join groups like FIRST Robotics. I think FIRST Robotics is in Brazil also. But they start doing crazy things like that. The older ones think that, hey, it's too expensive, it's cumbersome, I can't do it. The younger ones don't know what can't be done. So this is something you need the old and the young working together. Just like you work with me. I mean, you're always brash and challenging your dad, and it works out all right.
I have no idea what you're talking about there. Now, one thing I've heard you mention a lot is the importance of learning, especially later in your career, that you constantly have to learn. Can you explain what you mean by that? What is the value of learning how to learn?
Well, I'm almost 65 years of age now, okay, and I'm learning every day. I keep reading about things. I know that I don't know, 99.999% of things I need to know. So I keep learning. I'm not too old to learn. I'm not too old to reinvent myself. So, all of you practically listening to this are probably younger than me. So if I need to learn, you need to learn as well. You have to keep learning and reinventing yourself. It's simple as that.
And then, when we talk about high schoolers building robots or entrepreneurs on the front lines of these cutting edge issues, you interact with so many entrepreneurs, so many executives. How do you advise them on ethics? How should they think about that sort of thing when they're the first to get to a field?
You talk about ethics. This is your baby. You're the one who's been lecturing me on ethics all the time. You answer that question, please.
Great question. I want you to answer it. What should they think about? How should they approach it?
Well, first of all, ethics is not something that you can take lightly. That is, once you always know what's ethical and what's not ethical, what's right and what's wrong. We know this in our hearts. The moment you do something which you think is unethical, you have now crossed the line. There's no going back, because once you start crossing that line, it's a slippery slope down. So you have to let your conscience. All of us have a moral conscience. I mean, Brazilians tend to be very religious. So, very deep, religious values, Christian values. Well, listen to those values. Listen to what your parents taught you. Your parents taught you ethics. Go by your gut instincts. If it doesn't feel right, then it probably isn't right. It's not worth doing. Because even if you make money by doing unethical things, that money is worthless. So what's more important to your spiritual development is to do things the right way, to do things the ethical way. That you will never go wrong by doing the ethical thing. Even if you make less money, you achieve less success, that is success that you will enjoy by being ethical.
So for my final set of questions, I'd like to end where we began, looking at the next decade. So first, when you look at the next 10 years, what are you worried about? What concerns you?
Oh, I mean, everything concerns me. If you look at the governments of Brazil, if you look at the governments of the United States, if you look at governments all over the world, they're doing crazy things. I mean, we have a president who, I mean, is sort of bizarro. I mean, the guy is almost evil in the way he's behaving. I mean, I don't have to give examples, but no one could ever imagine that America would have leadership like this, right? This is the tip of the iceberg. And then you look at social media. Look at Mark Zuckerberg, who I used to think is a good person. I called him evil at the beginning of the lecture over here. Okay, the fact is he sold his soul, and he's turned evil, right? So technology such as social media that was supposed to do good is doing evil. In Brazil, WhatsApp has led to people getting killed. I mean, it's used to spread rumors. WhatsApp and social media was supposed to do good for the world, not to do evil, right? So we keep having technology being used for evil by the wrong people. This is why it's important for all of the people listening to this to realize that you have to do things the ethical way, you have to do things the right way, get rich by helping other people. Don't get rich by stealing from other people. That's the message I want to leave you with here.
Absolutely. And the final question, when you look at the next decade, what gives you hope?
The fact that we can solve the grand challenges of humanity. I also talked about all the good things we can do with technology. The fact is that good will defeat evil eventually. I mean, mankind has always had this good and evil scenario. So far, we've come pretty far with good defeating evil. So we just have to hope that this continues the way it did, and then we reach Star Trek and then build an amazing future.
So with that said, thank you so much. I would like to now turn it over to the audience for questions.
Good.
Guys, you took it really serious to have fun. We were here, the chat was booming. A lot of people were like commenting and laughing with you guys. So thank you very much for being here with us and to share with this energetic and so much, like we had so much fun with you and we learned a lot of things from you. And I would like to thank you also for the confidence boost. We Brazilians and Latin Americans, we always have this syndrome, the imposter syndrome, or how you want to call it. But it was really, really great hearing from you from Silicon Valley aspect out of our bubble to talk about this. So it was amazing. And a lot of people were commenting on the chat. But we also have some questions. So I'm going to start with this one that you touch a little bit about this, like that we always have to have the capabilities to learn, and independently the age we have to learn, and we have to be ready to learn, and we have to learn how to learn. But Rodrigo is asking, do you believe that the future we will have aging tax, or the tax that work for these people who are getting older, but they still have lots to do, they still have a lot of work to do? What do you think about this future of the workers, the labor force, or whatever you want to call?
Yeah, what I see in about 10 or 15 years from now is that robots start doing a lot of the work that human beings do, that humans are going to have less and less to do. On the other hand, we will have an era of abundance when we have all the food we want. We talked about unlimited clean energy, clean, almost inexpensive energy. So we will have all of those things. So we will have a lot of time on our hands. That time, if we now use it to uplift ourselves, to learn, becomes the most valuable. Because who says we have to work for a living? Why do we have to work 40 hours a week? Why can't we work 5 hours a week? Why can't we spend our life teaching, practicing music, the arts, helping other people, right? Who says that we have to be doing factory type of work and be slaves the way we've been in the past? We have a chance to build a new future here because technology is going to make that possible. So, learning is a key part of it. I come from India, okay? In India, my core belief is that the purpose of life is to achieve enlightenment, is to uplift our soul through knowledge and through learning, through giving back to others. This is what I do. So I'm spending time with you is because I want to share my knowledge. And by sharing my knowledge, I'm also learning. I'm learning from you also. So this is what we all need to start doing, is to start uplifting ourselves by learning and then by sharing knowledge. The more you give, the more you get. That's the way, this is one of the most important lessons I've learned in my life, is that whenever I've given something, I've always gotten back more than I gave. So this is an important lesson for all of you to learn. To keep growing, learning, and giving. Yeah,
we always say that the best way to learn is to teach, right? So I couldn't agree more with you. But I have another question that I would like to answer to ask the two of you. I would like to hear from Vivek and from Tarun. What about this new era of work where we always have to be on, where we always have to be working? What about work-life balance? And in the beginning of the talk, you were talking about the COVID and all its aspects and what is going to be here after COVID and all of that. But what about work-life balance? What do you two think about it?
That's certainly a challenge. I teach at Emory University, and I see with my students this idea of remote learning. On paper, it sounds great. You can learn from wherever you want. You can learn at whatever time you want. You're not constrained by location. But in practice, when you talk to students, they're completely burnt out. First of all, they have to engage in meetings like this for hours and hours on end in a day. Teachers don't really update their courses for that and they don't update their workload. So in exchange, they end up having to do more. It's more exhausting, and they're still expected to fill the same requirements. I see a parallel to the way we work there, in that now most of the world is working from home by force rather than by choice. But people are still becoming burnt out. Work-life balance has existed even less than we knew it before. And going back to the previous question, this is going to be a serious issue, which is that any of us that are serious about our work, our identity and our work are tied together. They're one and the same. So what happens when that work becomes less in demand, or it's less needed, or we can no longer define ourselves by that? So we're going to have to really address this question of work-life balance and work-life connection, and how we separate and distinguish the two.
And how do you do that in your daily life? Do you have any advice or so to share with us?
Let me know if you figure it out.
I mean, to me, there's no such thing. I mean, you do what's fun, and you can do as much of that as you want to do. So, to me, work is fun also, and that's why it makes it worthwhile.
Absolutely. I agree with that.
Okay, so we have another question from Rodrigo. Do you believe that the world with more technical decisions and less political decisions will be better?
Yes, but it's never going to change, because our politicians will never let it change. I mean, they're so obsessed with keeping power that I'm not optimistic about it. So, what I would tell these entrepreneurs is forget about politics, just focus on building great companies and solving the world's problems. And hopefully, these other people will worry about the politicians. Let everyone else worry about the politicians and politics. You worry about saving the world, and we'll all be happy.
This is one area where my dad and I disagree. I think technology is inherently political, especially when you're talking about changing power structure, the way people live, or overturning jobs and lifestyles and such. So I would give the opposite advice. I would encourage entrepreneurs to think deeply about politics and how their work affects that.
All right, so you get to listen to his advice or listen to mine.
Yeah.
This is really great. So we have two different positions, and this is what makes our learning happen, right? So I have the last question. What do you guys think? Are we going into a jobless future?
Yes, but not for a while. I mean, in America, there's a lot of reason to worry because it's a developed society, and there's no social safety net, and people expect, once you become 40 here, people want to be sitting in front of their TVs with their cans of beer and not learning and not growing themselves. So, and then they expect it's just to be the government's problem. In Brazil, you don't have such a safety net. So you're always learning and having to grow. So in Brazil also, you still have a lot of development to do there. So in America, in 10 to 15 years, we're going to now start seeing jobs disappearing. In Brazil, you probably have 20 or 30 years before you have to worry about that. So 20, 30 years is enough time for all of you to build your successful startups and do what you want to do. And then we'll come back maybe 20, 30 years from now to a follow-up conversation.
Yes, I agree with that. And I would say it will be a jobless future unless we start figuring out how to reskill, learn, and evolve our professions to go along with these changes as well, too.
Thank you, guys. I strongly agree with you. And I think you were helping us to build these tools to make it happen and to build this future we all want. So thank you very much for sharing all this amazing and so inspirational information with all of the Brazilians and everyone who is watching us from all over the world. So thank you very much, and congratulations for your job.
All right, all the best.
Take care.
Thank you, guys.